I'm Addison Brazil. Grief Club, the podcast, starts now. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Grief Club, the podcast, where I take the experiments offered in my book, First Year of Grief Club, A Gift from a Friend Who Gets It, and use them as launching points for deeper conversations with friends and experts. Today, I want to kick things off a little bit differently. I got a note from a listener, which I was very excited to get. And for everybody who has been writing me and letting me know how both the book and the podcast have been helping, I truly appreciate getting them. Even if you don't get a response right away, I do see them and I do make time when I can to go back and read what you've shared. But I got a question. I thought the question was a good way to kick off today's episode. So it says, "Hey, Addison, I love the podcast and it has made all the difference since I lost my husband. I've noticed that a lot of grief resources have moved away from the 5 stages of grief we heard about growing up. Where can I find more about the science behind looking at grief in new ways?" I love this question, especially for today's episode. Today, we are focusing on the week in the book where I bring up rage for the first time. And rage is not something that's usually talked about, and especially not in a way that it might help us move through our grief or carry it in a different way. And so I thought what I would do in response to this question is, one, direct everybody to an amazing episode on the Andrew Huberman podcast. He does an episode on grief. He references a lot from our good friend, Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote The Grieving Brain, who was on episode 1 and helped us launch this season. But he does it in an amazing way. So I just wanted to share this clip in response to this question, because I think it's a great way to get our brains moving today to think about things in a new way. Here's the clip from Andrew Huberman.
Oh, I do want to tip our hats to the incredible work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. By no means am I or do other researchers try and discount her incredible contributions, but I think nowadays we have a different and frankly a better understanding of what the grief process is like, and as a consequence, better tools to move through grief. In order to really understand what grief is in your brain and body and how to best navigate grief, I'd like you to do an experiment with me. For the next 5 minutes or so, I'd like you to at least try to discard of all prior notions of grief as just a state of sadness. I want to acknowledge that it is and does involve sadness. But for right now, let's think about grief as a motivational state, as a desire for something specific. In fact, I'd like you to think about grief as an attempt to reach out and get something that you very much want. Imagine yourself extremely thirsty, for instance, on a very hot day, and a glass of water is right in front of you, and it's a beautiful, clean glass of water, and it's completely full, and you so badly want to drink that water. But no matter how intensely you want it, and no matter how hard you try and reach it, it always shifts just outside your reach. So if you can imagine that, even just a little bit, you are touching into the experience of grief. How do I know this? Well, I know this because brain imaging studies involving what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, in which you can evaluate which brain areas are more active than others according to blood flow, which correlates with neural activity and so forth, teaches us that the brain areas that are associated with motivation and craving and pursuit are some of the primary brain areas and circuits that are activated in states of grief.
I absolutely love that clip, and I wanted to share it because it really starts to help us stretch our minds on what we might normally think grief is, or what we might have heard about grief, and how thinking about things a little bit differently can actually really serve us in developing resilience tools. The episode with Andrew Huberman is over 2 hours long, and I will put the link in the show notes. Make your way through that. It is such a beautiful resource. Today, we're going to jump into our conversation with Kay Scorah, who I met at Modern Elder Academy, where she facilitated a conversation with us about rage and focus. And it really allowed me to look at the things that really make me rage, meaning the things that are keeping me up at night, the things that I'm having panicked thoughts about, the things that I desperately want to change in the world. How instead of that just being a judgment on myself of like anger that I can't seem to work through, how that could deliberately become part of my purpose and my focus, and really drive me to this state of pursuit or motivation that Andrew was talking about, and how beautifully aligned that actually does go with our grief processes. I love Kay, and I know you will too. Let's check in with her now. Today's episode is based on week 13, which is where we talk about rage for the first time. And our guest today actually inspired the chapter and is mentioned in the book for doing so. It was the first time in my life I had this very formative experience where we talked about rage in a very constructive way. And I realized it was really something that could become a tool to identify where my focus in life could be and really what I really cared about. So with that being said, I have invited my friend, mentor, and fellow playful dance mate, Kay Scorah, to join us today. And before we get started, in the book, I have these conscious emotional check-ins. So I always like to just practice what I preach. And if you'd be willing, I'd love to invite you to check in with me, Kay. So in one word, how are you feeling right now physically?
Strong.
Mine's percolating. In one word, how are you feeling mentally?
Anxious.
Mine, yeah, I'm going to add EY to everything, ruminating. And in one word, how are you feeling emotionally?
Is roller coaster one word?
It can be. It can be.
Roller coastery.
Not only that, I will share the word with you. I will hop into that word. So it's for two in the seats because I'm right there with you. So just always, like to know where we're starting from and honoring where we're at. So I know you as so many amazing things, obviously a facilitator, a researcher, a writer, a yoga teacher, the lady who makes you dance on the deck in Baja, so many things, but I want to give you a chance to start off to just kind of honor your journey out loud, just share whatever you'd like with us, what makes Kay Kay?
I love this question. And how long have you got? But I'm very grateful to you, Addison, for helping me to think more deeply about grief. And there's a particular answer to what makes me me, which comes directly out of grief, not my own. But my father, my late father, was a twin, and his twin brother died when they were 12. And I didn't realize until I met you and really started thinking about this, how much that formed him and his relationship with us, his kids, and everyone else in his family. He was a very raw human. And because of that, I learned to be quite raw. So as I'm talking to you now, I'm beginning to cry. At my brother's wedding the other day, I was sobbing. So, yeah, that formed me, the openness to extremes of emotion, which I learned from my dad.
I love that.
So do I.
I love that. And what is that? What is, honoring the journey of that in today look like for you? What is that? How does that come up sort of daily now?
My little story, my paternal grandmother, so dad's mom, always said that when my dad met my mom, and they met age 17, dancing, that's where I get it from, it was as if he'd found the other half of himself again. And so I grew up desperately looking for that other halfness, that relationship with one other that would make me whole. And it has taken me so long to learn that this is not about a relationship with one other. I'm doing this sort of yin yang sign with my hands here. This is about allowing myself to be made whole by everything that is going on around me. So I have stopped looking for the other. I've stopped looking for a person, a solution, but I've started opening up my peripheral vision to more ways of making me whole.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And that's got to have some magic in it, in a way, for grief itself, because if you think about it the way you're explaining it right now, which I think so many of us resonate with, we're looking for this other half idea. That's a really big setup, especially when it comes to knowing that one day you will grieve that other half. That's just sort of the way things work. So that's really beautiful, and also very brave to be deeply connected in so many ways as well, because there's lots of micro grief and honoring that definitely can go with that. I'm going to keep that with me, what you just said, more than you know, and more than listeners need to know. But I really am. I'm really going to let that download, because that was just so of the moment for me. Amazing. So, easy, obvious swerve is to rage from what we were just talking about. But yeah, I'll never forget that day in Baja. We were, in that room, and we had that circle, and you invited us to explore what rage meant to us and what focus meant to us. And then there was this sort of, for me, this huge epiphany as I sort of ranted into how focus and rage always have really guided me. I've lived a very purpose-driven life, and I'm very motivated by making impact. So I didn't realize how much rage has always sort of guided the next way I want to show up in my life. And so it was something that I really, like, rage would not have been in the book, that like it just wouldn't have been if we hadn't had that moment. So obviously thank you for that. And also I just want to invite you, because now they're like, okay, great, so what did she say that day? Stop talking about it. But I just would love to hear a little bit about rage, and maybe even why you invited us to do that day. And yeah.
Well, first thing to say is thank you and that group that started me thinking about this, because I sat there, I think it was over one of those amazing lunches, listening to this conversation about rage, and I was amongst a group of people who are really good people, who want to make the world a better place, and they have rage. And it was the first time in my life that I'd thought, maybe we shouldn't put rage in the bad boy box all the time. Maybe we should start talking about the positive use of rage to spark change. So that was why I wanted you guys to help me think about that. And, I didn't facilitate the conversation. I was just being greedy. I wanted your ideas to feed my thinking about this. And I also, in the back of my mind, was a quote that I had heard many years ago, which was, grief met with indifference turns to rage. And as I sat there at that lunch table listening to people's, it wasn't in, they felt that they were being met with indifference. They felt that they weren't able to change anything. And so that inability, that powerlessness had turned into rage. So I was thinking, what can we do to reverse this journey? That take that rage and bring it back and use its power for change. Now, the obvious way of doing that is to start a revolution, to start a war, but you were not that kind of person. So you all went to, how can I focus my rage? How can I be really clear about what is causing this rage? And take tiny steps. So if I focus on what is causing my rage, rather than just let it sweep over me, can I be more curious about it?
You've reached Grief Club. Leave a message after the beep.
Hey Grief Club, it's Addy. Yeah, I am back talking during the ad, which should be your well-deserved break from listening to me talk, but we know sometimes that's not how it works. I just wanted to say, if you are really enjoying this, if you are feeling connected, a little less isolated and going, I only get this once a week, how can I stay connected throughout the rest of the week? The answer is social media. Now remember, when you're using social media, we want to use conscious consumption, and that's what I always promise at Share My Grief Club. I'll put it in the show notes. Anything that I don't create, I consciously curate, and it's all designed to help people on their way, to honor their journey, and if all else fails, find the funny. We'll see you there.
Yeah.
Now, I want to bring up too, because you had a way, and this is just lightning strike moment. Like when we spoke about rage that day, you actually invited us all to speak about it out loud. So if someone were to do this with a grief club friend, or who knows, maybe we will facilitate a rage day, because I would show up to rage day every month, as you know. But when we as a group sat together and we were talking, it's just hitting me now, because it really, really shifted my perspective. I had never had this experience before of how you had us as a group listen to each other. And I remember there were sort of rounds of what we could say and what we couldn't say. Can you share that again, how that worked? The three ways of listening?
The three levels of listening.
Mm-hmm.
What I encourage people to do is allow the speaker to speak. So I was just talking about the focus of rage. And the first step is to say to the speaker, I heard you say. And then you open up the quotation marks and you actually feed back the very words and phrases that you heard them say. And this does two things. First of all, it really makes you listen, because once you know you're going to have to play back what they actually said, you're listening very carefully. But it also makes the speaker A, feel heard, and B, once they get used to this, they're much more careful about what they say. When people really believe they're being listened to, they are much more careful about what they say.
That's a quote for time of all times right now in the world. Wow. So for me to put that in practice for listeners, it would, for instance, I would say, I heard you say that your dad was very raw.
Right. And then me, being bitch from hell facilitator, I would say, that's great, Addison, but we're going to take out the word that.
Right. I heard you say your dad is raw.
Exactly. And because even the tiniest thing like the word that implies a little bit of interpretation. So we try to really quote, and we even use I instead of you. So I heard you say, my microphone isn't working.
Right.
I don't say, I heard you say that your microphone isn't working. So it's
You did revealing the Wizard of Oz. Yes, guys, my mic isn't working and this is for show, okay?
Oh no, he fixed it, guys, before we start.
It is funny though how it's a perfect example of how in that circle, especially in life, like once you're really being listened to, and then once you realize you've really been listened to, you're like, oh yeah, I did say that, I did. Why did I feel the need to admit that my microphone wasn't working?
I'm afraid we've gone into laughter stage.
Yes, which is fine, which is always fine on this podcast. Why not talk about death and also be able to laugh? Why not, So the first round, they say, I heard you say. And then what's the second round?
So the second round is, because of what I heard you say, here is what I think I've learned about you. And when we do that round, we also check in with the person who's spoken that we're right. So here's what I think I've learned about you. I have learned that you like to laugh even when things are serious. And because of that, I think that you treat all emotions equally. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And also, I would never have put it that way. So I love the way you put that. Instead of being a child in church, I'm going to start saying, it's because I treat all emotions equally. That's why. Okay. I love that. Okay. So before I become any more of that child in church. What is the third round then?
The third round is this is what we share. So once we've checked in with them that we're right about what we've assumed, then we can talk about, well, in common with you, I was that naughty child in church who used to giggle and, you know, if someone was wearing inappropriate clothing, I would say it out loud. So that is the next level. This is what we share. And what usually happens in conversation is that we go directly to this is what we share. So we listen to someone else and we say, oh yeah, I had a thing like that once. You remember I went here? So we throw in our own anecdote and we're in too much of a hurry to get there. Whereas with this process, we go, or process in North American English, we go, this is what I heard you say, this is what I learned about you, this is what we share.
I love that. And you know, there's so much to do already when you're grieving, obviously, but a big part of, I always found the burden was finding the grace integrity of bringing people along with you and teaching them how to treat you, because we're not taught any of these things. We don't know, how to help somebody else. I've even self-admitted that after 13 years in the grief arena, I still froze every time somebody told me they lost a parent or a friend, because also just the weight of showing up in that moment, I just know how that is. So I love this idea of like being able to actually take these tools and set this up for yourself where you're able to do that. Because I don't know about for anyone listening or for you, but when I say something, especially when it pertained to my grief, when I was in the very raw phases of my grief before I ever started experimenting, if somebody immediately said, yeah, I get that because, and then made that about them, when it came to my grief, there was like sort of this, well, you can call it rage, this little anger, that popped up and be like, okay, but we really weren't talking about that. It was like, it was really hard for me to share. And all they were trying to do is make me feel more connected, because there was always this fear I was getting too disconnected by my experiences. And I could feel it. It was palpable. And I know it was coming from a place of love, but I never really had the words to teach people how to treat me and say, okay, I'm going to tell you something. And the first time, I just want you to tell me what you heard back. And I think this is something you could totally do. And I think that, coming from, 2 years in the mental health startup, all that work in peer support, I mean, this is like the basis of peer support. You set up some ground rules, and then, it really makes it possible for people to support you. And I say this all the time when people say, what do I do or say for someone who's grieving? And I say, ask them what support looks like for them right now. That's the best thing you can do, right? So I think it's such a cool tool to bring in. So we've invited people to rage this week, and to think about, what's keeping them up at night, like what can they just not leave alone? What makes them want to either make change in the world or themselves, and maybe it's not that big. I know that I tend to think sometimes on like, a global impact level, and that leads to my own personal exhaustion. But just within a daily basis, I mean, it can really be just how someone else acts at the grocery store, or, whatever it is, when you've asked somebody to do something and the way that shifts. When I just want to kind of give them that experience is when they've really gone into that, and perhaps they've set this up like we did, where someone's listening to them and repeating back. Because I think that room for clarification too was also very formative for me, when people tell me what they heard and I was like, okay, that was not what I meant. And I got some, very in-depth looks into like, okay, that's probably what it was like being in a relationship with you. Maybe you should have said what you meant. But once, it comes up and, we've invited in that safe space to get feisty with a pen or to share it with somebody safe or whatever it is. What do you suggest sort of as the next step once the rage ball's been created and they're now like holding it?
I'm thinking about, I love the metaphor of the rage ball. Mm-hmm. Because it's handleable. So I find that people find it really easy to find tiny droplets of joy. So we've been with the delightful Chris Murchison, who's also involved with MEA recently, we were talking about tiny droplets droplets of joy. So things like you're walking down the street and a kid does something inappropriate, apropos of our earlier conversation. Can we make our rage into tiny droplets? What is the source of this rage? What is the grocery store trigger? And can we play with it? You know, the horrible bully kid in the playground that used to tease those of us who were teased. Can we play with them instead of either running away from them or going in to fight them? Can we be playful with our rage? And I know that may sound as if I'm trying to trivialize, but actually play is not trivial. Play is the way we learn. So what am I going to do with this rage about the guy who always parks his car in my parking space? That's obviously a real thing.
Yeah, I'm like, so now I'm like, I'm here for it. So walk me through the droplets of that one.
So I can do revenge droplet, which is, you know, I can park across two spaces. So I get him mad. I can do turning rage to fun droplet, which is next time I see him, I'm going to say something inappropriately rude to him about it, but with a smile on my face. And especially as an old lady, I can get away with that because it's one of the great things about aging. You can get away with rage. So yeah, I always advise people to make their rage handleable. And there's also, again, the metaphor of the ball is great. What happens if I distance myself from my rage? If I throw it across the room, what does it look like from over there? What would my rage look like when I was 7? What might my rage look like when I'm 77? Can I take time, literally time out from this rage? So that's a couple of things. Play
and
with
sort
it.
of like, I like the idea again, and yeah, like you're saying, like, because it's still in the room, so you're still very much honoring it. It still exists. It's still valid. It, you know, it's can we coexist without something constantly needing to be done, you know, about the rage, or what is the, you know, when you're saying droplets, like I think about, like you said, the revenge droplet, the, like, you know, kill it with kindness droplet. Like sometimes they don't, you know, the whole Grief Club book is kind of about figuring out what serves you and creating your own kind of toolkit without me trying to tell you, but just sort of, you know, giving these opportunities. So I can see how, you know, you're looking for the droplets that obviously serve you, that, you know, that lead you to feeling better about how you're honoring it, but definitely not ignoring it. Because I think just a lot of us, especially when it comes to rage, and like I said, for me, it led to, you know, I was not aware until I was verbally saying out loud what, you know, what rage was for me and what was coming up, and knowing, like you said, that people were listening. That was a very powerful part, that I was going to be listened to. And what came up for me, I guess I knew in very spread out ways that I, you know, sort of felt about these things, and certain social impact issues were keeping me up at night, and, you know, but I didn't realize, like, how sort of when I verbalized it, it all was very much thematically the same type of rage as this, you know, I don't like when other people treat other people like they're not equal, was basically like the layman version of every example I used. And if they're going to do that, then I'd like to sort of use my privilege and my, you know, intelligence to sort of go in there and try to even it out a little bit and create some positive impact for people who, you know, are affected by these sorts of things. So it was weird. I was just very angry, and then I felt very listened to. And then I could not believe how, you know, we were all from different walks of life in that room. And when we did what I know about that was, I couldn't believe how much I had in common with so many people. And that when they thought about it, that actually does make them, you know, rage too, and based on what they heard and what they picked up. And so I went from these things that keep me up at night, you know, call it whatever you want, to something that was giving me a very clear path about what I cared about, what I wanted to do with it, how my ball could become handleable, and that I wasn't the only one holding that ball.
Yeah. This is also a lovely thing that can happen when we do share our rage. We find those shared common goals. So rage tends to be all directed at an enemy. And then in conversation, you might find a shared common enemy. But then if it's a really good conversation, you go on to the shared common goal. And that is where the power comes out of the rage, which is, let us not destroy the enemy, let us create the better world. It becomes creative rather than destructive.
Yes. Whew. Yes. That's something that Grief Club can definitely do together. All right. Well, I would talk to you all day, as you know, and we can set up that day as well. But I'm so happy that I got to have you on here. I, have cheekily been waiting for this moment for all the minutes we've been together. No, but I do, try to stay always on the podcast, equal parts honor the journey. It can get deep and heavy, and find the funny. And so I just always like to invite whoever I'm speaking to share how they find the funny, or where they've found the funny when it comes to death or grief, or even not at all. Just, what lights you up, what makes you laugh, what's finding the funny for you?
Well, you gave it to me earlier in this conversation. It's always inappropriate children that give me the most joy. So I remember, I won't name any names, but when someone was very young and we were at a nativity service in a church, and this person who was about, 4 years old, said to me very loudly in the middle of the service, "So, how did baby Jesus get inside Mary's tummy?" This was at the top of his little voice. And then I had to respond because I was the adult in the room. So I said very quietly how the baby got inside Mary's tummy, to which the small child responded very, very loudly, "Do you think that tickled her?"
Oh, why are all the good ones always kids in church? Literally, why? Yeah, no, I love that. I really love that, and I love how those find the funnies can be a seed to go back to and reignite. It's almost like the spectral, the facial expressions, everything that we had in those moments, and then it just kind of always, brings that swelling of joy back. I love that. What a great range, just going from grief to raw to rage to how did Mary get pregnant. That's what we want. Yeah, for real life grief, the real life conversations. Thank you so much for coming on today. I know that I just want to acknowledge that and welcome you too as well. My one words from when we checked in a little while ago are different. I can feel it in my face. I can feel it in my soul. I feel, if I had to pick one word checking out, it would be connected. And I wasn't feeling that going in. And I always like to add words to my one word rule. So, if you have one word to share, I would love to hear it.
It's going to have to be joyful.
That's a switch. We were coming in a little heavy today. We both were. We were, the London sun just didn't quite, do it for us. But it has now. And I just, that's the good stuff. That's the whole point of being here, right? Is looking for these opportunities where even if we're talking about something heavy like grief or rage, that there's opportunities to just kind of, find the funny in between and just connect with somebody else who gets it. I think that's the good stuff for me. I know that listeners will want to find you because you've really just dropped droplets, to use your own words, today. And it's like, who is this really? And I do encourage everybody to go do a deep dive. Your writing, your research, everything you've done is just, so incredible. So yes, where can they do that?
Well, I have such a peculiar name that if they just Google me, they will find me. My company is called Have More Fun. So our website is havemorefun.org. My blog, which, just word of warning, very bad language, sometimes very rage-ridden. My blog is a WordPress blog, Kay Scorah. Twitter, all the places, I'm there.
Amazing.
KayScorah.
And we will put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And I will talk to you soon.
I hope so. You better.
Yes. Well, Grief Club, that's the show. If you enjoyed it, please let us know by liking and leaving a review. This will help as many people who may need what we're talking about find it the fastest. Remember to honor the journey, and when that gets tough, find the funny.